Hey, what is up guys, Mark Gatiss here, back with another Doctor Who Series 10 review, and today I'm going to be reviewing Empress of Mars, which is the 9th episode of the series, and the return of the Ice Warriors for the first time in 4 years. Now this episode isn't just noticeable for the return of the Ice Warriors, but also because it's the first story in the entire 50 years since the Ice Warriors first appeared that's actually been set on their home planet of Mars. And so that was a really neat idea that I was very excited about. However, before going into this episode, there were a couple of things that kind of deterred me a little bit and kind of dampened my hopes on the episode a little bit. Those two things were the fact that Mark Gatiss was writing it, who has written some good episodes in the past, but has also written some pretty poor ones as well, so he's a rather hit-and-miss writer. And the second one was the Next Time trailer. I wasn't really getting the right feel from the Next Time trailer, and it was really kind of turning me off of the episode. And I was prepared for this week's episode to be my least favorite of the series. Ironically, it turned out to be almost the exact opposite. No, it's not my favorite of the series. That is still Oxygen. But I actually thought that it was a really strong episode. And I think it was certainly better than the Ice Warriors' last outing, Cold War, also written by Mark Gatiss. And I think maybe even my favorite Gatiss episode of all time. Perhaps one or two others are above it, but I think it's definitely a worthy contender for the top Gatiss episode. But without further ado, the episode begins at NASA, where a space probe is sending back images from underneath the polar ice caps. And the Doctor and company are there as well to observe this momentous moment. And what happens next is really simple but really effective. In the image that's sent back, we see the words "God Save the Queen" on the surface of Mars. And it's a really intriguing teaser sequence. Now, if you've seen the Next Time trailer, you know that there are going to be Victorian soldiers on Mars. But nevertheless, that's a really gripping teaser, and it certainly grabs your interest as to what is going on Mars. Now, while I did enjoy that aspect of it, the pre-titles teaser did leave me wondering, why were the Doctor, Bill, and Nardole there in the first place? It's clearly not because they expected something like this to happen, because the Doctor is clearly very surprised when it shows up. So, why are they there? I mean, I guess they could just be visiting, but that is massively coincidental for them to just, on a whim, decide to go to NASA just in time to see this unexpected thing. You'd think that if the Doctor were to go there at that exact time, that he would know that something momentous is going to happen. So that was just a little bit weird to me. Also, why is Nardole okay with this? All throughout the first half of the season, he was so desperate to keep the Doctor near the vault, and now suddenly he's just nonchalantly going on adventures with the Doctor again, even though the threat from Missy isn't diminished at all. I mean, he even goes to Mars with the Doctor to investigate this, and when you compare this to his previous outrage at the Doctor for going off-world, it seems incredibly ludicrous as to why Nardole isn't giving up any fight at all against the Doctor. Regardless, they land on Mars, and most of the story is set underground, but what we do see of the planet in orbit, and there's a couple of shots on the surface, it's absolutely gorgeous. The VFX team did a wonderful job recreating Mars. It just, this shot in particular, I just absolutely adore it. It's fabulous, so great job on that. But anyways, the TARDIS lands underground, and there the Doctor, Bill, and Nardole discover a tent and a campfire there. An actual lit campfire, which Bill and Nardole quickly deduce must mean that there's oxygen in the atmosphere, and they're quick to remove their helmets, much to the Doctor's protesting. But sure enough, there is oxygen down there. And then Bill falls down some sort of hole. I guess it just appeared out of nowhere. That's a little bit convenient. And the Doctor sends Nardole back to the TARDIS to get some sort of rope or something. And then the TARDIS flies itself away from the situation. Nardole doesn't do anything. And thereby stranding the Doctor and Bill on Mars. Now, I have a couple of comments about this. One, it's not explained in episode why the TARDIS did this. We also saw some issues with the TARDIS near the end of the pyramid at the end of the world, so perhaps it's connected. I hope that we get some sort of explanation to this in the future, otherwise it's just completely random and completely stupid and completely pointless. But I understand why Nardole has been taken out of the episode, because the script for the episode was written before Matt Lucas actually joined the main cast of Series 10. So even though he does make an appearance, it's not a very big one, just to accommodate the original script. And for the first time, I thought something that I didn't think I'd ever be thinking. I knew before I watched the episode that Nardole was only going to have a few minutes of screen time, but when he first disappeared in the TARDIS, I was actually disappointed that he wasn't going to be in the rest of the episode. And that is definitely not something that I would have said 3 or 4 episodes into the series. So good job on the writers for actually making me think that throughout the series. That's great. But yeah, so basically, Nardal's appearances are scattered throughout the first 10 minutes of the episode, and then the very last minute, maybe 2 minutes at the end of the episode. Because the TARDIS is acting up, he goes to Missy for help. He ends up letting Missy out of the vault to help him fix the TARDIS. Now, this seems a little bit out of character for Nardal once again, because he's been the main one who's so determined that Missy is guarded in the vault, and now suddenly he's let her out. So we don't actually see him doing that, so perhaps Missy hypnotized him or something to let her out. We know the Master does have hypnosis powers, but it seems incredibly out of character if Nardal let Missy out of his own free will. And I get, of course he has to get back to the Doctor, but once again, it's out of character for him to have gone to Mars in the first place. So hopefully we get a little bit of an explanation later on. I don't expect it in the Eaters of Light, perhaps in the finale. But some of these scenes are scattered throughout the first 10 minutes. I think 3 or 4 times it cuts back to Nardal. And personally, I found these scenes a little bit jarring. They just interrupted the flow of the episode for me, and so I wasn't a huge fan of those. But now we meet our first Ice Warrior of the episode, and we meet some Victorians. Now this is a really interesting concept. I wasn't sure how they were going to explain away Victorians on Mars. I figured it would be something to do with the Ice Warrior taking them there. Of course, in our present day, we haven't even reached Mars. And here we have soldiers from 150 years ago who are on Mars. So it really gets you invested in the mystery as to what the soldiers are doing there. And now that we've seen our first Ice Warrior, I'm just going to make a general comment about the Ice Warriors in this episode. Their design is pretty much the same as it was in Cold War. I don't know if there's any differences at all, actually. And that's a good thing. It looks great, and it's very faithful to the original costumes from the classic series. I do have a bit of a gripe, though, with the voices. In the classic series, they used to speak in a very whispery voice and hold out their S's. But they don't do that at all here. We only really hear, I think Friday is the only regular Ice Warrior that we hear speak. And his voice is a lot deeper and more gruff, kind of like Skaldak in Cold War. And so that's a little bit disappointing because it lacks a bit of continuity. And we don't hear him hold out his S's at all. We do hear the Ice Queen hold out her S's, but her voice isn't whispery. But I'll get to the Ice Queen a bit later. And so it's revealed that these soldiers have found this Ice Warrior, whom they've named Friday, in this crashed ship. And so Friday asks them to help him get back to Mars. And they, I guess, help him to repair his ship, and they arrive back on Mars. I'm a little bit weirded out by this, because how do Victorians, I mean soldiers, not even engineers, Victorian soldiers, be able to figure out how to help repair a spaceship? I don't really understand how that works. We're not really given a satisfactory explanation to it. And so we do get an explanation as to how they end up on Mars, but it seemed a little bit out of the grasp of Victorian soldiers' abilities. And so it's a little bit strange, but I mean, the idea that they did come to Mars with Friday, that's a valid idea. At least it's given some sort of explanation and not just left to the imagination completely. But it's a little bit of a lackluster explanation in my opinion. But they've arrived on Mars on Fridays hoping to find the rest of his species, but it turns out Mars is now a dead planet. He's been hibernating for way longer than he expected to, but he's come back to try to find his queen and reawaken her. And that will be the titular Empress of Mars that we see in just a few moments. But we have these Victorian soldiers who have remained on Mars, one, because Friday's ship needs more repairs because they crash-landed back on Mars, and two, they're mining for precious gemstones under the surface. They haven't found anything yet, but very conveniently after the Doctor and Bill arrive, they blast open the entrance to the Ice Queen's tomb. And so we see her sitting there in all her glory, very well designed as well. Obviously she's a bit different than regular Ice Warriors, but I think it's a pretty good design and gets the job done well. And so it's revealed that Friday did have this ulterior motive for getting back to Mars, and now the Doctor must choose a side. He could either side with the humans, because if they accidentally wake up the Ice Warriors, then the Ice Warriors could just completely obliterate them, or he could side with the Ice Warriors because the humans are the invaders in this circumstance, which is a rare thing. We don't get to see that often in Doctor Who. In any case, they leave the Queen alone for now, but of course we have a classic greedy dude who goes and screws everything up because he sees the gemstones in the queen's tomb and he tries to steal them. And when he does, this awakens the queen, whose name is Araxa, from her slumber, and so now, of course, she is going to go on the offensive against these invaders. And so, the Ice Queen, the Empress of Mars, Araxa. This is the very first time we've seen a female Ice Warrior, and I think it certainly makes sense that the Ice Warriors would have a queen. It seems to fit with their hierarchy, but I do think it's rather interesting that we haven't seen one up, or even heard of one up to this point. And so I've already mentioned that I do quite like the design of her. The actress was a little bit over the top at times. The voice was a little bit grating. Reminded me of the Empress of the Rachnos, which isn't exactly the most enjoyable of images to conjure up, but at least she extended some of her S's sometimes. But most of the time I found her performance to be a little bit too over the top, and it grated on me a bit. But I did like the idea of the Ice Warrior Queen, and I thought it fit well with Ice Warrior lore. And so it's at this point where the first confrontation between humans and Ice Warriors occurs. The humans come in, and the soldiers come in and discover Araxa awakened, and so, of course, we have Kachalov, who is second in command, but he likes to act like he's the one in charge. He decides that they need to go on the offensive immediately, to which the Doctor tries to convince him not to. But one of the soldiers accidentally fires a shot at Araxa, and she decides that she will give the soldiers mercy at the Doctor's request, with a mercifully quick death. And so this is how the war kind of begins. The humans escape, and using their mining gun, they seal off the entrance to the tomb, and Kachalov takes charge from the first in command. And so Kachalov is a rather rash character, very self-seeking, and he's quite a jerk throughout the episode. He's got a little bit of charm to him as well, you know, classic bad guy charm. And so Kachalov makes the second human villain that we've seen in Series 10. Personally, I think he's much better than Lord Sutcliffe, who we saw in Thin Ice. Kachalov's a bit more rounded out, and I feel like he gets more time to shine as an actual character, as opposed to Sutcliffe, although both of them do have their cliches. But I thought he was an enjoyable villain, especially within the context of the story, and of course by the end of it he does get his just desserts. But I'm not quite there yet. We've still got to talk about the awakening of the Ice Warriors. Now this is a little bit interesting. Some of them come out of tombs, I suppose. That's kind of reminiscent of Tomb of the Cybermen, although I'm a little disappointed. We see this one shot of a whole whack ton of tombs just lighting up as these Ice Warriors get ready to come out of hibernation, and when I saw that I'm like, oh boy, everyone's in trouble now. But we never get to see them come out of those tombs and join the fight. We don't ever get to see those Ice Warriors awaken, which is a little disappointing. But in addition to the tombs, we also have some coming up out of the ground, which, while it looked visually really neat, why are some in the ground and some in proper tombs? I'm not entirely sure why that is. It seems a little bit inconsistent. And speaking of coming up out of the ground, later during the actual war portion, when the Doctor and Bill and the guy who used to be first in charge, I can't remember his name, when they're locked up in the cell, Friday, who previously seemed to be crushed by falling rocks, appears climbing out of the ground. So I guess he just dug his way underground instead of getting crushed by the rocks. So that seemed a little bit weird to me. At first when he crawled up out of the ground, I was just like, wait, what? Where did you come from? What are you doing here? You're dead. So that seemed a little bit weird. But I guess we needed an Ice Warrior to be on the Doctor and Bill's side, right? So, oh well. Also, other quick thing before the main combat begins, Araxa says, "Sleep no more, my warriors. Sleep no more." Which very blatantly calls out to Mark Gatiss' previous episode for the show, Sleep No More. And I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but it certainly caught my attention. Just a thing of interest. But now the war begins between the Victorians and the Ice Warriors. Of course, the Doctor previously told them that they don't stand a chance against the Ice Warriors, and we get to see that played out here. I don't know if we ever get to see an Ice Warrior actually get killed in the episode, but we see plenty of humans killed with this new effect from the Ice Warrior gun. Now, I've seen a lot of people complaining about it, saying how cartoonish it is, and how they couldn't take it seriously. I personally thought that it was a really neat effect. When I saw it in the Next Time trailer, I agreed with the goofy comments, and I think that the first kill was a little bit goofy with the CGI, but I think the rest of them actually were pretty effective, and I thought it was a really neat method of killing and a lot more visually arresting than, just a simple laser shot and then you fall down to the ground dead. But it's at this point that Gatiss tries to kidnap the Queen, and this is where he gets his end. The previous first in command, who was earlier outed as being a coward and deserter of the Victorian army before coming back, he surprises Gatiss and gives him a nice shot to the abdomen, killing him and thereby ending the main antagonistic force of the episode. And following on with the Ice Warriors' Code of Honor, Araxa deems this leader's actions to be honorable and decides to spare him and the rest of the humans if they pledge themselves to her. And thus the conflict ends and the two races become peaceful with each other. Anyways, the Doctor sends out a message to be able to help the Ice Warriors grow and thrive and essentially revive their empire, but without all the bloodlust and killing of the past. And this was really, really neat, because we get to see the response to this message, and it turns out it's Alpha Centauri, who, for those of you who have seen some classic series episodes, appeared in The Curse of Peladon and The Monster of Peladon, both stories of which featured the Ice Warriors. And what's also awesome is that it was voiced by the same actress 45 years after the first appearance. And this was such an awesome callback, not only just because of this cameo appearance of a classic series character, but it actually sets up the later events that would happen in Curse and Monster of Peladon, which is just so cool, which in turn kind of makes Empress of Mars a very, very far-fetched prequel to those two stories, which is just awesome. Good job, Mark Gatiss. That was really, really spot on. So I bet a lot of people who have not seen either of those two stories were probably pretty confused, but for those of us who have, that's an awesome callback. And it's great to see that continuity is being kept in the Doctor Who universe. And of course the episode ends with the TARDIS landing back on Mars because, as I mentioned earlier, Nardole has released Missy so that she can pilot the TARDIS back to Mars. The Doctor, understandably, is very upset about this, and the episode ends with Missy asking the Doctor if he's alright, which is really kind of strange and suspicious. This scene, like some of the earlier scenes with the Vault, felt out of place with the episode. It felt kind of abrupt to me, and kind of shoehorned into the story. But there'd better be some sort of payoff to this happening in this episode, because if it's not really referenced again or built on in the future, that'll be just really random and completely pointless. I don't want this arc to just be shoehorned in there at the last minute just because. Earlier in the series they were doing a good job with keeping it in the episodes but not making it feel intrusive. Here I feel like it's starting to get a little bit more intrusive. So hopefully with the Eaters of Light that doesn't happen. If it can be more coherently added to the story, then that would be better. But after that is the finale, so the series arc is going to come right to the forefront, and we won't have to worry about that anymore. But anyways, that is Empress of Mars, one of Mark Gatiss' strongest episodes of the series, and a very, very pleasant surprise. I enjoyed it way more than I expected to. It's pretty near the top of the series in my opinion, and it's a great return for the Ice Warriors. Awesome classic series cameo, a really basic story but also a really enjoyable adventure overall. And so I think I'm going to give Empress of Mars an 8 out of 10. That brings my series average to 7.61 out of 10. You know what, I think Empress of Mars is my second favorite of the series. So good on you, Gatiss, because I don't know if any of her episodes have ever been that high in a series, in my opinion, before. But anyways, next week we have the Eaters of Light, which I'm especially excited for. I think it was probably my most anticipated episode of the series, because it is written by Rona Munro, who is the first classic series writer to return to the new series. She previously wrote the very last classic series story, Survival, which I'm a pretty big fan of. The Next Time trailer looks awesome, and I just love the title, The Eaters of Light. It sounds just so classic, and I'm very excited for what this episode has to hold. It looks like an amazing adventure. But anyways, that's it for my review of Empress of Mars. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please, put your thoughts on Empress of Mars in the comments below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? How does it compare to Gatiss' other episodes? And did you think it was a triumphant return for the Ice Warriors? Anyways, that's it for this review, so Mergaman4 over and out. I'll see you guys later.